All right, grab your dice and get ready, because today we are diving deep into the world of Greyhawk.
This one's going to be fun.
It really is. It's like, I think this is like going to scratch a very specific itch for people who love D&D, because it's the origin story.
Yeah.
And so we're going to do a deep dive on Greyhawk, where it came from, why it's important, why you should care, all that kind of stuff. But just to set the stage, Greyhawk, like...
It's, you know what it reminds me of? I don't know if this is like a weird comparison or not, but like the primordial soup, right? Like it's like where all of D&D kind of like oozed out of, right? Like this is really the DNA of so many things.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because it started, I mean, talk about humble beginnings.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I mean, this is like
a basement.
A basement in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Gary Gygax.
With his buddies.
Yeah, just like, hey, you want to play this game I've been working on?
And I've got to imagine, right? Like those guys had no idea, you know? They just wanted to like hang out and roll some dice, kill some goblins.
Yeah, and little did they know they were going to like shape the future of fantasy gaming as we know it, right?
Yeah, 100%, yeah.
Like their decisions were going to...
And that's what's so fascinating about Greyhawk is that it's not like somebody sat down with like a big, you know, idea board and was like, all right, here are the continents, here's what the kingdoms are going to be, here's, you know, the cosmology. It really did grow organically as they played. Like Gary Gygax famously would just be like, you know, drawing on the map as they were playing.
Yeah. Like, oh, you want to go through that door? Hold on a second, let me consult my notes.
Okay.
There's a gelatinous cube in there.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's terrifying. So, it's speaking of terrifying, we have to talk about Castle Greyhawk. I mean, this is the dungeon, right?
Yeah.
The dungeon.
Yeah, it's, you know, if you think about it, it's like the ultimate dungeon crawl, right? Like, it is
Gotcha.
the dungeon.
Yeah, I mean, this is like, people talk about Tomb of Horrors and all this stuff. This is Gary Gygax's, like, you know, Dungeon of Doom.
Yeah, it was notorious. Like, he would run this, and I think there's this almost apocryphal story that, like, only 3 players ever, of all the years, you know? Like, only 3 players ever actually made it to the bottom of that dungeon.
That's insane, out of everyone who's ever played.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it was, like, documented or anything, but it's one of those things that just, like, gets passed around, and it speaks to, like, how challenging it was, you know?
Yeah, it's like, what would even be down there? You know what I mean? It's almost like those, like, real-world archaeological mysteries where you're like, we don't even know what we'd find.
Right. Like, what could possibly be, you know, in that final chamber that's so, you know, valuable or important or whatever.
Or dangerous. Maybe it's so dangerous.
It makes you want to play, right. It makes you want to, like, explore and see, like, what is down there.
Yeah, you want to be that 4th person to make it all the way. That's incredible. So you've got this game, this world that is being built as it's being played. It's like a living, breathing thing.
It's like Westworld or something, right? Like, it's becoming a real place as they're playing in it.
Yeah, exactly. And so how does this go from, like, you know, basement game with hand-drawn maps to published D&D setting? Because that's a big jump.
Well, I mean, you've got to imagine, right? Word starts to spread, right? Like, these guys are having these amazing games, and word is getting out, and people are starting to hear about this incredible world, and they're like, we want to play there too. This sounds amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the ultimate...
It's the ultimate game, right? Like,
Yeah.
everybody wants to play the game that Gary Gygax is running.
Exactly.
And so it was really, like, demand, you know, from players that drove him to eventually be like, okay, fine, I'll publish something. And so it started, you know, in Dragon Magazine, just like little snippets, like little glimpses into the world.
Yeah, just like little teasers, like, hey, you want to know more about this world?
Exactly. And then came the big one, the Greyhawk boxed set. And that was like, you know, for D&D players, it was like, I don't know, like getting like the director's cut of like your favorite movie or something.
Yeah, it's like the expanded universe, right?
It was like, okay, here's everything you need to run your own Greyhawk campaign. Here are the maps, here's the lore, here's all the stuff.
It's so cool. So it went from like literally this personal creation to like now it's becoming like a shared thing.
Exactly. It went from a homebrew game to like, you know, official D&D canon, essentially.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so before we move on to what happens next in Greyhawk, I kind of want to pause here for a second and just like, what's your take on, like, what's the big takeaway from this kind of like origin story?
I mean, to me, it is just such a testament to the power of, you know, just friends getting together and playing games. Like the fact that this, you know, one group of friends in a basement could create something that would go on to inspire, you know, literally millions of people, right?
Yeah.
It's incredible. Like it speaks to the power of imagination, of collaboration. It's really remarkable when you think about it.
It's that spark,
Yeah.
you know? It's that initial spark of creativity that then just like explodes outwards.
100%, yeah.
Love it. All right, so we've got Greyhawk. It's out in the world. People are playing it.
Yeah.
But what happens next? Stick around because things are about to get epic.
Yeah.
So we've got this amazing player-driven world. People are getting their hands on Greyhawk. They're starting campaigns. And then,
It's time for adventures.
yeah, it's time for adventures. And not just any adventures. We're talking about some of the classics.
Yeah.
Like, when people think about old school D&D modules, Greyhawk is where it's at.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And, I mean, we could do a whole episode on just Greyhawk modules.
Hours of content.
Oh, absolutely. But we got to talk about, I think, probably the most famous one. Like, if you were going to pick one.
Temple of Elemental Evil.
Yeah, the Temple of Elemental Evil. It's like, it's legendary.
You know, it's such a good module.
I mean, it's so good and it's so tough, right? Like, this is
It's like
not,
the meat grinder.
it's a meat grind.
Like old school D&D, like that was the Gygax philosophy.
Yeah.
Throw them in, see if they survive.
It's brutal, but it's also like the Temple of Elemental Evil. What's so cool about it is it's not just a dungeon crawl.
No, it's a campaign.
It's a whole campaign. And it's got this really interesting story.
On the factions, right?
The factions. It's got its own little ecosystem.
Well, yeah, and it ties into the wider world, too.
Exactly. It's like
Yeah.
it all matters, right? It's not just some random dungeon that you're exploring.
And that's something that Gygax, I think, did so well.
Yeah.
Was tie those things together so it really felt like, you know, this dungeon is here because of these events, and these factions are vying for control because of, you know, this ancient artifact or whatever it is.
It feels alive, right? It feels like it's part of a real, living, breathing world.
100%.
Okay, so we've got these great modules. People are adventuring in Greyhawk, but then they get a curveball, a big one.
Greyhawk Wars.
The Greyhawk Wars. I mean, talk about shaking things up.
Yeah, you're a player, you're used to, you know, the world being a certain way, and then suddenly, boom, everything's changed.
Really, the map's different.
New alliances.
New enemies. Everything's been, like, totally upended.
And you have to adapt, right? Like, that's what's so cool about it, is it really forced players to think about the world in a new way.
Yeah, and it really set the stage, I think, for how D&D settings would evolve over time.
Oh, 100%. It's like, you know, you think about, like, the Forgotten Realms, they've had their own time of troubles and all these big events, but Greyhawk really, I think, was the first one to really kind of go there.
It was groundbreaking, almost.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got these epic adventures, world-altering events, but Greyhawk also gave us something else that's, I think, really, really cool. It gave us some of the most iconic creatures and characters in D&D history.
Oh, for sure.
And I think, to me, the biggest one, the one that everyone knows and loves, or maybe loves to hate.
Are you talking about the Drow?
I am talking about the Drow. These guys, they came from Greyhawk.
They did.
They're shadowy elves with their poison and their intrigue and their complicated society, all of that. Like, that started in Greyhawk.
Yep. It was a Gygax creation.
It's incredible.
And I think it speaks to the power of, you know, a good idea.
Yeah.
Like, he introduced these creatures in his own home game, and they just captured people's imaginations, and they took on a life of their own.
Yeah, and now you can't imagine D&D without them.
Nope.
They're everywhere.
They're in video games, they're in novels, they're part of the fabric of D&D now.
It's remarkable. It all started in Greyhawk. So Greyhawk, we've seen it go from this homebrew campaign to this like driving force in early D&D. It's got iconic modules. It's got the Drow. It's got these world-changing events. But, you know, like any good D&D campaign, there are some twists and turns coming up.
Oh, yeah, it's not a straight line to success, right?
Not at all. And this is where things get a little meta because we're talking about the real world kind of bleeding into the game world here. So Gary Gygax, he departs from TSR, and Greyhawk kind of loses its champion. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he was the heart and soul of it in a lot of ways.
And so what happens?
Well, you know, other settings start to come up, right? Like the Forgotten Realms starts to become really popular around this time.
Yeah, Drist and all the gang.
Exactly. And that's a whole other, you know, deep dive we could do on the realms, but...
Oh, yeah, we'll get there.
But the point is, Greyhawk kind of, it doesn't go away, but it takes a little bit of a back seat for a while there.
It's like it's still there. It's like those old ruins you find in a dungeon.
Exactly.
It's like, oh, yeah, we remember that place. It's still out there.
Yeah.
But is it really part of the game anymore? I don't know. But here's the thing about D&D players.
What's that?
They're a passionate bunch.
Oh, yeah. They love their game.
They love this game, and they love their settings, and they're not going to let Greyhawk just fade away like that. So you had all these, like, fan communities popping up.
Online, especially, yeah.
Yeah, people keeping the flame alive, sharing their own homebrew stuff.
Keeping those campaigns going.
Exactly. Because the Dungeon Master says, the adventure doesn't end here if you don't want it to.
Exactly. And that's what's so cool is that even though it wasn't being officially published as much, people kept playing it.
They kept the world alive.
Exactly. And then Plot twist. Wizards of the Coast comes in.
Be heroes come in to save the day.
Right. They buy D&D, and they know that Greyhawk is important. They know that it has this legacy.
They understand, yeah.
And they do something really cool. They start bringing it back.
Yeah. They start republishing some of those classic modules, updating them for new editions.
Introducing it to a whole new audience.
Exactly. And then they do something really, really cool. They launched the Living Greyhawk campaign.
Oh, yeah. That was huge.
I mean, talk about ambitious. This was worldwide, organized play. People all over the globe playing in the same shared Greyhawk campaign.
And their choices mattered.
Their choices mattered. They were shaping the future of the setting.
That's so cool.
It's amazing. So Greyhawk comes back in a big way.
Bigger and better than ever.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, it's like finding a magic item that you thought was lost forever. So even though Greyhawk isn't like the main setting for D&D these days.
Right.
It still has this special place, right?
Oh, yeah. It's like the granddaddy of them all.
Yeah, it's the OG. And I think that's what's so cool about it. It's a reminder that these worlds we create, these stories, they have a life of their own.
They belong to everyone.
They belong to everyone. And that's the beauty of D&D, right, is this collaborative storytelling experience.
Exactly. It's taking something that, maybe started in one person's imagination and then just like expanding it outwards.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you've never explored Greyhawk, maybe it's time to dust off those old modules, fire up your imagination, and see what adventures await.
There's a whole world out there.
There really is. And who knows? Maybe you'll be the one to discover some new corner of the Flanagan's that no one's ever seen before.
That's the beauty of it.
That's the beauty of it. All right. That is going to do it for our deep dive into Greyhawk. Until next time, happy adventuring.